Back out in the shed after work, having another look at this torque tube, and I think I've figured out what the problem is. I have the drive shaft in there, and that's fully engaged with the muff coupler now. And I don't think you can see in the mirror, but if you turn that, the differential turns, and that's far enough back that that should now mate with this pretty easily. And I also worked out what the problem is. It also occurred to me I can tell exactly how far back the shaft needs to go, because this is the drive gear for the speedometer drive, and underneath the torque tube here there's a little slot just in here, so I know that that drive gear has to match up with that slot. So that's how I know how far back it needs to go. But the problem is this, which is the center bearing that fits in there. It goes that way around. And if we slide that over the drive shaft, if it stops falling down, that will only go that far down along the shaft, and you can actually see there's a little step there. So it gets to that point and stops, and that's the problem. That is too far down the shaft. Now it's kind of interesting because this drive shaft I had shortened, but it was shortened at the differential end, so this end hasn't been changed. So I think the problem is this drive shaft isn't the one that came out of this torque tube. There must be different ones. So this is again one of these places where I think mixing and matching parts has messed me up a little bit. So I think the easiest solution for me here is, obviously I can't turn down the shaft here. There's no way I can fit this in my lathe. But what I could do is open out the inside of this bearing. Now I have heard of people leaving this out altogether because the torque tube has been shortened, so you don't necessarily need it there. But I think what I would prefer to do is machine out the inside of this bush so that it'll slide over this piece of the shaft. I can polish this up a little bit by hand just so it's rubbing on a nice piece of steel there, but this should be all hardened all the way along, I guess, so it should be fine running there. And I think that's what will get me past this problem. The only other solution is finding another drive shaft which is correct. So I may go and compare this drive shaft with the one up off the parts car leaning against the wall there, but the problem then would be, even if I pulled out that drive shaft, I'd have to get it shortened again. So I think the best choice is, given that some people do leave these out, I machine it so this will move further up the shaft. It's still going to support the middle of the shaft there, and that should get me going. The other thing I've realized is I'm actually missing a bearing. There should be a bearing in the end here, I believe. Pretty sure the other torque tube has that bearing, so I need to look at that and see if I've got one of those. Okay, I'm making progress now. I cleaned up the prop shaft above the piece that had been already machined. The rest of it was all still pretty concentric. I just rubbed it with some wet and dry just to make sure it was all smooth and clean on that point. And then I just opened out the bearing just a fraction on the lathe. It didn't need much at all, and that allowed me to slide the shaft further into that bearing, or slide the bearing further onto the shaft. As soon as I'd done that, I was able to push the bearing back down into position. That can be a little bit tricky because you need to line up the holes to get the screws in. And I find the best way to do that is push the bearing down, and then you can sort of hook it with a scriber and just sort of pull it round bit by bit till you find one of the holes, and then you can line it up. But with that done and that back in place, it was actually pretty easy then to get the drive shaft to slide all the way down, engage with the muff coupling, and engage up this end. Everything just went together pretty easily once I'd done that. So that was what the problem was. The drive shaft wasn't going far enough into that center bearing. So now I have the half shafts just loosely in place, but you can actually turn the gears. This is in, I guess that would be first gear. It's either first or second. No, that's first, where this large gear is engaged. And if you turn the input, you can see the gearbox turning there. And the wheels turn, or the hubs turn. They even turn in the right direction, which is good. And you can actually see the difference in the gearing. So if you go into top gear, which is forwards like that, so it's effectively a direct drive through now. Oh, it's a bit hard to tell, but so that's actually now moving faster. And theoretically, if I put a mark on here and turn it, it should be 5-to-1 ratio. So 5 turns at the gearbox here should move the wheels around 1 rotation. That seems about right. I haven't actually measured it. I might do that actually. I'll get a Sharpie and just put a dot on one of the teeth and just check that that's actually what's happening. So that's all good. I've bolted this on just with my temporary bolts and a 10 thou shim, and I haven't actually tried to see if this all still... No, so that's not enough. I do need 2 shims in there by the looks of it, because that is completely tight, completely jammed up. So it looks like more than 10 thou shim. I think it's about 15. When I tried it with the cardboard measured 15, and that gave me clearance. So it must be between 10 and 15 thou that I need. So I'm probably going to need to get new shims. And I'm still a bit confused about the bearing that goes in that end, because I don't think I've got that one. I don't seem to have one lying around. There's no spare bearing sitting anywhere in my pile of bits. And I would have thought that would have come with the kit for rebuilding the rear axle. So that's something to look into. What I could do is actually put the rear hubs on properly, put the actual bearings in place, but I think I want to wait, because once I do that, of course, I've got all that extra weight in the back axle there, which just makes moving it around by myself a little bit awkward. I should actually check that's not... see, so oh no, that's... you can tell the torque tube is locked up, I think. No, it is rotating. So maybe that shim is enough. It might just be the weight of this, meaning it's hard for me to lift it up to check that it's still moving. But that's definitely progress now. I did have another go at lifting it, and it is just heavy. I'd forgotten that it was actually sitting on the jack, so I was able to lift it up and down on the jack to check it still moved. And that does move fine, so that 10 thou or so of shim is good. So that's all I can do tonight, I think. I'm going to find out what that bearing is, and I'm going to have to either order one or pull one out of the spare torque tube. I'll see what it is and see if I can get one locally easily. I'm sure the spares will have them, but the postage from the UK is a little bit slow, so that would take another 2 or 3 weeks to get here. So if I can find one locally, I'll go with that. But I did actually put it into top gear and checked. Rather conveniently, the input gear has little holes in it, so it gives you an index on the gear, and I was able to actually turn that, and yes, you rotate that 5 times in top gear and the rear wheels go around once. So I don't know why, but just actually seeing that work and being able to play with the gearbox, turn it, and see it happening at the wheels, I just like that for some reason. It just makes all the mechanics of it very, helps explain it in my head, and I know how it works and I understand how it works. And that's part of the fun of building a car like this, is by the time I'm done, I can honestly say I've been through every single nut and bolt on this thing, and I'll know it backwards. So I think that was a good result today. The other thing I still need to figure out is if it's worth putting the little grease nibbles on the tops of the trunnions, but I think it is. Even if it isn't, it can't hurt. They're not going to get in the way. One thing I do wonder about is, with no load on the car, you can see the rear axle comes very close to the chassis rails. I don't actually know what they had in terms of rebound for those, bounce and rebound. So I know on some of them I've seen there's a hoop that goes over the axle, and that constrains it going up. What stops it hitting the chassis on the way down, I don't know. I think there must be some sort of padding that goes there, rubber blocks, something like that. It's kind of one of the unique things with such a low car and the underslung rear axle like that. So it's a bit different to a normal vehicle. I'm not sure if you could hear that, but it seems to be a lot of people racing up and down the road this afternoon for some reason.